although in the program there is 9:15, if we start a minute earlier, it's not a problem. Those who wish to attend will join us in the coming minutes, and those who are already here, I guess, are waiting the event to start. Good morning. I think that we will be very much on time. As I said, we will have 5 speakers, but 2 main introductory remarks will be made by 2 speakers who you already heard yesterday, and I don't need that I make introduction to who they are because you already know. Just maybe the format of this morning meeting. So in fact, we were thinking if there was face-to-face meeting, it would be possible to make like a real policy lab. And so what is meant by policy lab? The policy lab, it's meant that we would be split into different groups, tackle with different challenges. Each group would have at the end porte-parole, and the final outcome would be like a concrete result, like policy recommendation to well, national politics, whether to EU decision maker, people, bodies, etc. But since this is not possible, we will at least try to simulate it by kind of this introductory remarks and then through guided debates, so that at the end of the discussion, we will be able to produce some recommendations. So without further ado, I would first like to give the word to Mr. Asserate to let us know or continue where he stayed yesterday. What was very interesting, and in fact, I mean, this is something that targets to the policy-making processes, what he's exposed, the fair trade policy or the business policy of European Union in Africa, which is a huge driver of migrations towards Europe. So this is already something that we could discuss and we could elaborate further on, put something on the paper and make it kind of recommendation. So Mr. Asserate, please, the word is yours. Just to turn on the microphone.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Hribar. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you again. And I would like to make a few points of how to improve the EU policy frame as far as what I said yesterday. Here are some recommendations. If Africa is to have a future, Europe must first and foremost abandon its catastrophic economic and trade policies. It must finally put an end to subsidizing its farming industry at the cost of developing nations. It must urgently lobby for effective international sanctions to be put in place to combat the worldwide practice of land grabbing, which has robbed the poorest countries on earth of their most precious asset, which is their agriculturally viable land. Notwithstanding all the necessary endeavors to bring industrialization, farming is the real key to the development of the African countries. Through improved methods of cultivation and measures against soil erosion, the crop yields in many African countries could be doubled without a great deal of effort. Africa requires broad-based support for small and medium-scale farming through microcredits extended to local processing firms, through a program of road building to give goods easier access to markets, and through halting the import of produce dumped on the market by European concerns, which effectively leave local producers high and dry. Africa needs aid for development that is sustainable and places a premium on individual initiative. Support for small enterprises by means of micro loans plays a central role in this, for even small sums are often enough to enable people to develop their own income sources and to lift themselves up out of their own poverty trap. Ladies and gentlemen, above all, it is essential to help and encourage women who represent the key to Africa's future. In the repayment of small personal loans, they are far more reliable than men, I must say. They tend not to spend their money on drink, and they are less prone to corruption. In the areas of healthcare and education, their role is especially crucial. Whenever mothers' levels of education increase, the incidence of infant and child mortality falls. And the longer girls go to school, the fewer children they conceive later in life. If Africa is to take its problem of population development firmly in hand, then it must invest in women. Primarily, Europe must do all it can to ensure that Africa is properly governed. The same thing that applies to every country in the world of necessity also applies to the states of Africa, which is they can only develop if they are blessed with good government. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm convinced that a credible threat to choke off the supply of money to them, to the African dictators, would achieve the desired result. Provided, that is, that Europe speaks with a single voice. As long as each country in the EU pursues its individual interests in Africa, Africa's leaders will continue to be able to play one off against the other. Which means if you don't give me the money, I will go to the other country. But if the EU were finally to bring itself to adopt a common policy, its word would carry far more weight. When will the EU finally link its provision of development aid to Africa to the strict condition that good governance be implemented, and in cases of doubt, be prepared to draw the appropriate conclusion and halt its aid? The power of Africa's dictators only remains as entrenched as it is because they are, in Roosevelt's memorable phrasing, our bastards, the bastards of the West. One thing is certain, ladies and gentlemen, no one from outside, not America, not Europe, and not even China will be able to save Africa. Only Africa itself can do that, provided its people can regain their confidence and believe in their own strength. Only then will the exodus of talent from Africa come to an end. Africans must take their fate into their own hands, and Europe can and must help them to do so, such that the African continent, which is currently hemorrhaging its livelihood, may one day become a continent with a future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I think you asserted several, let's say, policies that should be definitely reframed and revised at the level of the EU. So the most, let's say, visible is, of course, the agribusiness and then the education, government, etc. So we will definitely draw some conclusions based on your words, based on what you said. So I would now give the floor to Mr. Habsburg to continue and to present his views. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. I feel a little bit slightly lost here because, of course, I could not follow the entire discussion yesterday afternoon. I would just like to point out two aspects that were at the time that I was able to follow in the beginning of the first couple of lectures that were kind of really sticking out to me. One was that almost every speaker that took the floor yesterday started out talking about language. That does not necessarily mean the individual languages that we have in Europe or outside Europe, as important as it is, but it means that a common understanding is of the greatest importance. An understanding on what this intercultural dialogue actually means. But this is only possible if the right, and I think I like the formulation of the cultural literacy that came up, if the cultural literacy really applies, if people are literate and educated in what they are talking about. It was important for me to point out that when we are talking about that intercultural dialogue, we should not mention cultures having a dialogue, because that doesn't happen, but it's humans, it's people having a dialogue. Therefore, the knowledge is important, to have the knowledge to lead this dialogue to come to a positive conclusion. But I personally want to leave it with that in the beginning, because I know that it went on highly interesting after I had to leave to another meeting. So please, I give it back to you, Dejan. Thank you very much. Okay,
thank you very much. Yeah, definitely. I mean, this what you said on this cultural, what you basically highlighted, the cultural literacy. Yeah, primary or the prime factor is, of course, education, and I think more dialogue, not only between people, but between countries as well. So this is something that would help maybe EU as well to understand each other better in forming different policies. Okay, now I think we can move to three panelists that have something to say from the first hand in terms of policy making process. Let me just briefly introduce them. These are Philipp Jauernik. I guess majority already know him. He's the president of Paneuropean Youth of Austria since 2016, and he worked for some time in the European Parliament. It means that he knows how the policy making process goes from the first hand. The second speaker is Peter Stach, or Stach. I hope that I pronounced it correctly. If not, Peter, correct me. He is the chairman of the Christian Democratic Party Youth, and he was president of the Youth EPP. And yeah, so he worked for some time in the PR agency, and then he was also in the heart of the policy-making process in Brussels for several years. And the last speaker will be Gerfried Gruber, and he's also in the center of policy-making process at national level in Austria, being now employed since 2020 as Director Forest Policy, Austrian Federal Ministry of Agriculture. So you will see that all three speakers have extensive experience in what is needed for them, for the one concrete policy to first take place and then to come into action, that we can apply it to all member states. So I think that we can start with Philipp first. You hear me? You need to unmute yourself.
I think I can hear you pretty well, and I hope you can hear me too.
Of course, we hear you very well. Okay, Philipp, you were, as I introduced you, you were working in the European Parliament, so you know the process from the first hand. What can you tell us, let's say, about policy making process in general? For example, when someone, a normal citizen, who is not, of course, or who has an initiative, what are his chances to persuade, let's say, a politician that his views, opinion go further on, and at certain point becomes a talk on the European agenda, whether in Parliament or goes even to Commission or whatever?
That's a very interesting question, Dejan, and I'm happy I can maybe elaborate a little bit on it. I mean, first of all, it goes without saying that for a policy to be implemented, what you need is a majority. That's kind of, as I said, it goes without saying, and you have it stated in the contracts, in the EU treaties, how in specific policy areas you make legislation. That's pretty clear. If you ask for the single person, so to say, well, in the European Parliament, you have the Petitions Committee, which I had the honor of being in charge of, which was from time to time a very interesting committee, since you didn't really need very many signatures on a certain petition to get the floor within this committee. The process was totally different. It was, or still is, you hand in a petition on the portal of the European Parliament concerning anything that has to do with EU policy per se. So if it's affecting national legislation only, the Parliament will reject it immediately. But in any other case, as long as you can build up some kind of connection to European policies, or any field that is in any way affected by the treaties, the petition will have to be dealt with within the committee. And yes, one signature is enough. So this is a very low set bar to really get into the heart of European legislation, although the committee itself isn't, has no legislative powers, but you have lots of MEPs there. And the committee has some certain powers towards the European Commission and the other institutions to at least make some background checks. For example, you're living somewhere in Poland, there's a factory nearby, and you have the feeling that this factory is polluting the atmosphere more than it should. Or, well, it shouldn't at all, of course, but there are certain regulations, air pollution regulation and stuff like that. And of course, it will be checked afterwards, and the Commission can impose certain specific measures in the affected area. And very often it happens after such investigations that new legislation comes along. These kind of things that can be dealt with, that can be seen on the Petitions Committee floor, very often find themselves a little bit later, a few years later, in some new Commission proposal, be it on environment, be it on social standards, various things. So this is a thing where you can really make a difference as a single person. The other thing is, of course, you can always talk to your MEP in your region, depending on which country you're from. Well, in Malta, of course, there's a smaller amount of voters coming to one MEP than, let's say, in Germany or France. And of course, your ideas must be very good. Everybody thinks his or her ideas are the best. Politicians and their assistants are used to that kind of thing. I think Peter will be able to tell us all a little bit more about that. I experienced it myself. As an MEP office, you receive dozens, if not 100 mails per day with people telling you their very good ideas for the future of Europe or their particular interests. If you don't comply with the ideas of the party the politician represents, it might be a little bit more difficult, let's put it like that.
No, but this is good, if I may jump into, so you said, of course, hundreds of emails per day, different initiatives, etc. And you said that it's sometimes a bit difficult to penetrate with some ideas. But for example, we had very concrete policy as Mr. Uriarte exposed. For example, agro-business subsidized to the agriculture is an issue in the European Union. For example, if I may ask Peter Stach, for example, if, I don't know, there is a petition or group of citizens coming addressing this issue to one of the MPs, what would happen? What are, for example, possibilities on your side, and which obstacles you would face from the other side, like from industry, from lobbyists, etc.?
Yes, well, we have to first understand that this is the first thing. We have to understand that in the European Union, only the Commission can propose a legislation. Nobody else can do that. So,
that's true.
And then there are mechanisms. I mean, the European Parliament, the MEPs can amend the proposal, and the member states also can have their say in the proposal and shape the proposal to the final legislative act. So this is what we have to understand when we ask ourselves, okay, what can we do in order to make changes to existing legislation or propose some new one? As a citizen, of course, one very powerful instrument now in the Lisbon Treaty is citizens' initiative. But of course, it has, even that doesn't force the Commission to act. Even if you put together millions of signatures around Europe, at the end of the day, and we have seen it over and over again, the Commission may decide and, well, have to give it some thought, but may decide, okay, we will not legislate. We understand this request, but we think, for instance, that it is already handled by the European law, or that it shouldn't be regulated by European law at all. If you really want to be effective as a citizen or a group of citizens, you first have to find your way how to talk with the Commission. Before everything even starts, you need to make your problem visible for the Commission. And you need to find ways how to meet commissioners, directors, general, and so on. And also, another thing is the Commission, every proposal has several stages. And the first one is a communication of the Commission. The communication gives just a very broad and general outline, publishes a general outline of what the next proposal will be about, what they think about it, and citizens and enterprises can again comment on that before even one word of legislation has been written. So this is another way how, or another tool how to influence the outcome. But in my experience, I've worked in the European Parliament for 9 years, and in my experience, I mean, the most effective, and when we talk now for the moment, let's not talk about citizens, but about businesses. When you're a business, the most effective is if you are able to convince the Commission about your ideas before they publish the proposal, because afterwards it's very hard to make substantial changes to it. Because then if you succeed in that, then the Commission will be your voice in the whole legislative process. If you can convince the Commission of that what you think should be done is the right thing to do, then in all the next steps, the Commission will fight for your interest. so to say. If that doesn't work, then another institution you can influence and sway your way is the European Parliament, the MEPs. And again, you need to understand the process in the European Parliament in order to be effective. So for instance, it doesn't make much sense. It makes, well, at the end of the day, every vote counts, of course. But again, every proposal from the Commission goes through committees, and everything that goes through committees also at the same time is discussed in political groups. And you need to find the right MEPs to talk to, the ones who are in charge of the particular legislation. Then you are effective if you are able to talk to them, if you are able to reason with them, okay, this should be done differently because this and this and this. And it's not, I mean, you can identify these people. Of course, this is all public. You can see, okay, there is a rapporteur for this file, this guy from Denmark. There is a shadow rapporteur from EPP, this woman from Germany. And these are the people I need to talk to. And you can see how the majority can be built in the parliament for your amendments. And it's the best thing, again, I mean, not already come with your own amendment, with your own wording, what you, to be clear about what you want. And then also another, last one is the member states. Because what we often forget, and this is, well, this is also because the member states want us to forget sometimes, that it's member states that have a huge influence on the final piece of legislation, and that are consulted during the whole time when, during the whole legislative process, and they can bring their own amendments. The experts from ministries weigh in and give their own opinions and the political opinions of the governments. And at the end of the day, European Parliament and the European Council are co-legislators in when it comes to most of the legislation on the European level. That means that without the member states, it's not possible to adopt European legislation. Okay, it is possible, but these are separate, only in some cases. Most of the legislation that governs the issues that concern citizens is co-legislated, is adopted together. It must be adopted by the European Parliament and by the European Council, and the European Council is governments of the member states.
Okay, thank you. Now you made an excellent introduction for Gerfried Gruber. I mean, you are working on a national level, so you're a national policy maker. What is the difference, for example, that people maybe do not know the difference between enacting legislation at the EU level or the national level? They think, well, we simply go to Brussels and tell something and they will accept. No, it's not that way. It's pretty much the same thing as it works on a national level. So, for example, if citizens approach to you at national level, what are options? How you as a policy maker do the legislation, or what is the process, what we should be aware of, if you can highlight the national aspect.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me quite well.
Yes, we hear you.
That's fine. It's an honor for me to be here and to elaborate a little bit on my experiences. Thank you, Mr. Hribar. You said quite well, I'm now on a national level, but at the same time, the unit I have the honor to lead in the ministry is also in charge of international and European affairs concerning forest policy. The point is, I have the possibility to have different perspectives, having been working in Brussels in total 10 years, I think, with some interruptions, Vienna, Brussels. So, and I began not in the ministry, but for the legal interest group for farmers and forest owners. It's the Chamber of Agriculture in the legal office. So it's good to have this overview. There are many, many cross-sectoral issues, and we have to deal with policy matters on different levels. Europe is quite a complicated thing. Just to give you a glimpse on, as you wish that I elaborate a little bit on how it works. When you, Mr. Stach said already, we are co-legislators in Europe, so you have the European Parliament. You could say the Parliament stands for representation of the European citizens. And for me, I'm trying to help representing the interests, in my case of Austria, to the EU, so as member state. And putting all these lines together and to finally come to a conclusion and political decision, this takes a while. Once there is a proposal by the Commission, it takes, let's say, depending on the subject, 2 to 3 years since the legislation is finalized. This is always a problem for the EU, being a little bit complicated, too slow sometimes, and we try to do as good as it gets, certainly. But devil is in the detail. You have to have discussions among the member states to have a majority, a qualified majority, at least for most of the subjects, in order to reach a position for negotiations. This takes time. And then it gets more complicated. You have to address members of parliament, but it's not us, the member states directly, but the presidency, the rotating presidency of the EU. Actually, now it's Portugal. When I've been in Brussels second time, there was the Austrian presidency. This was quite a huge effort, but you have to distribute the efforts a little bit between presidency, member states, members of parliament, commission, etc. So, and then it gets even more complicated and also intransparent a little bit. And you have the so-called trilogue negotiations between Philipp knows quite well from the European Parliament side. You have the trilogue between Commission, the negotiation team of the Parliament, and the presidency. And then there is always a feedback to the groups, also the expert groups, the political groups in the council. So, and then step by step, you come forward to a final solution. Certainly, the point is that it's important to address people, to include them. The Commission, before the Commission, it was already said that the Commission puts forward legislative or other drafts or strategies, etc. And normally there is a public consultation. Just to give an example, I'm now in charge of forest policy. So in Europe, we are elaborating now the new EU forest strategy for the next period, which is quite in our view, for Austria as a forest-rich country and a strong forestry sector, a very important item to have this strategy. So there is this public consultation now ongoing. Everybody can, each citizen can contribute. This is very important. The huge effort is then for the Commission to collect many thousands maybe of interventions, to have a resume, and then to start negotiations in the expert groups and with the Parliament to come forward. So let's see how this will come forward. This is one of the examples. May I quote, because Africa was the item in the agricultural policy. I've been working on agricultural issues for many, many years for the common agricultural policy of the EU and from the Austrian side, certainly. The point is we always fought for keeping the subsidies. So this is a very tricky issue because our farmers, they don't have a huge income and they are very dependent on this transfer income. We have many small businesses, especially in Austria, family farms, small sized, and they are not always competitive. There's a huge divergent situation across over Europe, the European Union, on structure, on competitiveness. And we have the structure of the WTO, for example. There have been steps that are quite promising, like the abolishing of export refunds. These really destroyed markets in third countries. Land grabbing is an issue. We hope that we can contribute to the efforts of the Commission with the new strategy on comprehensive strategy with Africa and the preparation of a summit of the African Union and the EU. So there have been steps, and we try to contribute to this. And to close my remarks on to other aspects, forestry is a good example because it's a very horizontal matter, and you have to integrate many policy areas. You have to have partners, so other member states that maybe are that you endorse each other with your policy, your strategies, and your positions. So we collaborate with other member states who have also a strong forest sector, who are very keen on having a good policy. The point is that forest policy is in the competencies, formally in the competencies of member states, but we have to coordinate many policy areas which are at the level of the EU, like climate policy, environment, energy, etc. This makes it very challenging. And the EU and the member states have to come to a conclusion on at which level, which decisions have to be made. You know quite well in the Pan-Europe movement that it's a matter of subsidiarity. And we in Austria have a strong point on this, keeping the subsidiarity, and that's that the level of decision is not always clear. And to be pro-European is not always that decisions have to be made in Brussels. And some legislative, I would say, the frames, yes, but maybe the way how to reach the goals, we have to stay at state level and regional level in order to be very efficient. I leave it with that. I could talk more, but I think I was already too long, but maybe there will be some questions on the practical work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gruber, for this introduction, if I may call it. So before moving to the second round of questions, I would first like to take some questions from the audience, because there are several questions in the Q&A session as well as in the chat. And they are mainly related, of course, to the policy that we discussed, also to agriculture. And then once we finish this, we will move on to the topic of the webinar, which is intercultural dialogue. So let me read the question from the audience, and this addresses mainly Mr. Aserate. So Europe has an ever stronger competitor in Africa, that is China. How is the Chinese involvement to be seen, as its aid is not based on good governance of the receivers, but on its own interests, such as getting countries indebted, purchasing and getting control of resources in mining, agriculture, and forestry? Same question was, the question in the same direction is also in the Q&A session. So Professor Aserate has done well on his recommendation. He talked well on my undergraduate long essay project on Nigeria, leadership, accountability, and governance. So I will give now the floor to Mr. Aserate to answer or to comment these questions.
Thank you, sir. A very interesting question. And ladies and gentlemen, I can assure you, China was never our first choice. I have been a consultant for African and Middle Eastern affairs for over 35 years. And I can assure you, we have been begging Europe to come and invest in Africa. And nothing much has happened in the last 10 years. Perhaps I can give you an example as far as the Federal Republic of Germany is concerned. In the Federal Republic of Germany, we have something like 440,000 institutions and firms who are globalized and who are global exporters, out of which only 825 firms are to be found in Africa from these 440,000. firms that we have in Germany. At the moment, we have 17,000 firms dealing in Africa from the People's Republic of China. We had in 2019, the total investment of the People's Republics of China in Africa alone was $227 billion. So what should we do? I'm still begging for Europeans to come and invest in Africa. And I can assure you, as far as the Federal Republic of Germany is concerned, a lot of help is also being offered to middle-sized firms to go to Africa, as far as guaranteeing them the worst case. The German Ministry of Foreign Development has issued another bond, which can be asked for by middle-sized firms in Germany. But I'm afraid things are not moving that way. What we see from Europe is undoubtedly development aid, but never the kind of help that China is offering Africa. And I assure you, I know that the Chinese are not coming to Africa as Santa Claus. Of course they want our gold. Of course they want all our oil and all the the different things like coltan and cobalt and everything that Africa has to offer for their own development. But we have to work with them at the moment because there is no other person answering our call.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, we will now move to the topic of the webinar, and maybe here I have a question for Peter Stach. So you've been working in the European Parliament for 9 years, from 2010 to 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And we know that in 2008, it was a European Year of Intercultural Dialogue. At that time, we were talking a lot. I mean, there were a lot of conferences, events dedicated even on EU agenda. There were quite many issues related exclusively to intercultural dialogue within Europe. And yesterday from Professor Lech de Smeche's presentation, we saw that the intensity of discussion about intercultural dialogue slowly went down. Can you tell us how important, let's say, after the Euro crisis in 2009, 2010 on the European dialogue was important at the EU agenda, or it somehow disappeared? Because, I mean, in times of crisis, the intercultural dialogue within EU should be even more intensified to hear each other, to understand each other. So what happened after that crisis on? Was still this topic very important, or it was swept somewhere under the rug?
I wouldn't say it was swept under the rug because, well, it just wasn't in focus at all. But I wouldn't see that necessary as a bad thing. Because what happened was that the intercultural dialogue that was sometimes even a little bit artificially promoted by the institutions as a nice abstract concept, as something we want to have, but we don't really know how it should work. In times of crisis, that has become a reality because, and look, I'm not saying, and this is the thing, with the real dialogue, sometimes people talking, they sometimes don't talk so nice to each other, but they still are in dialogue. And this is what happened, for instance, in 2015 with the Greek situation. I mean, we knew and we discussed that around Europe, in every European member state, we discussed the situation, we discussed the help that was necessary for Greece, for Portugal, for Spain. And sometimes we make jokes about Greeks, and the Greeks were angry about Germans and so on. But for me, This was a real dialogue, so to say. Maybe not the nicest words were spoken sometimes, but it was sincere. It was out of sudden we cared about Greece. We didn't care about Greece so much before. Out of sudden, the problems of Greece became our own problems, and of Portugal, and of Spain, and of France. And, again, the terrorist attacks, the problems of the countries that were hit by these attacks became our problems in Slovakia, became our problems in Austria as well. And for me, this is actually a good development, because we moved from this artificially supported and subsidized intercultural dialogue towards a real dialogue, towards like noticing each other, thinking and discussing each other's problems. Because we start realizing these are common problems, and we don't need anymore this subsidized version, this artificial version of intercultural dialogue. Maybe we would need, time will tell, we would need some kind of support on the road later on to keep not to keep this kind of dialogue, but to use it, to develop it even more. But I mean, when you ask me, I'm quite satisfied with how it went.
Okay, that's it's interesting. So basically, the crisis reveals then what really lies into the mind of people and member states, as you said. So Greek finally told what they think of Germans and vice versa. Before I continue with the questions, Reinhard, you asked for a word since you have some questions, please.
Yes, thank you, Dejan. I want to come back on a point we discussed yesterday, especially in my panel, and this will be then a question to our two highnesses who made the introductory remarks. Yesterday, the three panelists in my panel, if I understood them correctly, their position was that we do not have a European culture, but we have different cultures in Europe. And from my position, coming from the Pan-European Union, when you look back to Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, he spoke about a European culture because these Europeans, we have common roots. Some people say he, as he was born in Japan, he could see the unity of Europe as he was somebody who is coming or was coming from outside. And maybe we do not see that from inside. So now I will force Asavos Asarate into the position of Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, as he is coming from Africa, to get his point or view on, is there a European culture with the view from outside, and what does that mean for the European identity? And the question to Karl von Habsburg, coming from inside Europe, what would be for him the core elements of a European culture? And to connect it with real politics, is the loss of a European culture the reason why we do not find a common approach, for example, as mentioned, in African politics, in foreign politics, etc., etc. And what would we have to do to find common solutions?
Would you like me to start?
Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kluczek. For me, what does Europe mean? I think I have been influenced by the words of the first German president, Theodor Heuss, who was once asked, "You always talk about European values. What are they?" And he gave a beautiful answer. He said, "The European values rest on three hills. The first one is the Acropolis, the second one is the Capitol, and the third one is Golgotha," which means, in other words, Greek philosophy, the law of Rome and the Christian faith. Of course, today, the third hill, Golgotha, is no more valued, or it isn't as valuable as it used to be when I came to this country. It is disheartening for me to see that in the Federal Republic of Germany, in the last year alone, 286,000 Catholics and 278,000 Protestants left the Christian churches. So this is my definition. And these three values have now become my values. And within these three values, that is why I consider myself, when people ask me what I feel, I say, my fatherland is Ethiopia, and my homeland is the Federal Republic of Germany, which means Europe.
Okay, thank you. So then I would give the floor to Mr. Halford, since you were addressed as well, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, of course, I would underline 100% and sign on to what Asfa just said in a very deep way. And I probably would just bring one or two little examples that kind of pulls it. It's wrong to say it pulls it in our time, because what he said is very actual and very important. I mean, when Reinhard, when you asked the question, the one thing that came to my mind was a story that my father was telling me quite often, which was when he came back after the Second World War, after spending years in the United States, and he came back to Europe, he was only coming from abroad. He saw what the great difference was between, in this case, the United States and Europe. And that was just the way how basically the structure of the country, the layout of villages and towns was, where basically that in most history-grown places, the center is a place of worship, is a church, whereas in the most modern cities, the center of the town is an administrative building or a prison or a police station or something like this, but it's not necessarily a spiritual place. So that is something that was for him something where he said that was very palpable, that this was the difference between Europe and the United States. And I also have to say that a little bit from my own experience when I'm traveling around and I see how people from abroad see the European Union, then I see also that they consider the European Union as a construct which is of such great outlook for the future that they would just love to copy it. And when I'm in the European Union and hear all the moaning and groaning about the difficulties that we definitely have, there is no doubt about that. I always feel then very good when I'm abroad and I can see how esteemed the institutions of the European Union are looked at. I mean, I know, for example, particularly when I was traveling, for example, in the ECOWAS states, so the West African states, and was talking to politicians there, and they were talking about the European Union as a construct from the future that they're envisaging for their own area. I mean, many people just forget that this is an area of collaboration of states, which in some areas works really quite well. It is very little known to many people in Europe. I mean, they have their common currency. They have quite an intense collaboration on many fields. But what they are saying, for example, where the European Union is just light years ahead, is of course in the not only the rule of law. I mean, we know that, but also in the fact of the structure of the jurisdiction that we're having by having a European Court of Justice. That's just something that they consider so important because they don't have it and they see how much they're actually lacking it. When we're asking ourselves, what can we do to kind of enhance the European spirit and try and give it a bit more life, I think a very important thing is to not only look at the European Union as it is seen by many today, which is a purely economic union with a political dimension, but to look back at what the origin of the European Union was. And when you see that the founding fathers of the European Union definitely, or the community at the time, definitely saw it as an area of security, also of military security after the horrors of the Second World War. And they basically knew that they were only able to create a union if they would start with the economic aspect, because the political aspect was at that time not possible to use because of the situation Germany was in. It would have been impossible directly after the Second World War to bring Germany in and have it being part of a political union. A lot of things had to happen before that. So the political union had to happen at a later stage. But if we're kind of thinking back on what these original ideas was, and I'm now talking about those founding fathers from the time after the Second World War. I'm not even going back to the Coudenhove ideas after the First World War, where he was in a very visionary way already seeing how the European Union was developing, and therefore having all this concept of pan-Europe, of a combined Europe, of a Europe that is combined in its fight against nationalism. When you take all these roots together and try and implement it today and overlay it over the economic system that we're having, then I think we have done something very important. We're kind of basically bringing Europe also back to its roots and let it forget this prevalence of purely the economic questions. But then also you can see that in the collaboration of different states within the European Union, some of the classical European structures of this European culture are coming out again. Yes, of course. I know it sounds very much pro domo when a Habsburg speaks about Mitteleuropa, about Central Europe. But yes, you can see in a certain collaboration of the states involved having those common historical roots, because they had the same common historical problems, whether it was economical or infrastructural problems or traffic or anything that was happening in this area. This is coming up again if you are willing to kind of let those roots also permeate into the modern times that we are having, into the way how many people see the European Union, see the perspective of the European nowadays. So I think that would be very important, and that's just something where I think also the Pan-European movement has an important role to play, is basically, having that symbol that we can see behind Reinhardt on the wall, where you have the Pan-European symbol of the Hellenic wisdom and the cross of Christianity. And there I'm coming back to what Asfa said at the very beginning, surrounded by the 12 stars, which are pointing. I mean, there are lots of other explanations for that, but that's all nonsense. The 12 stars are the 12 stars of the Virgin Mary, which are pointing back to the Christian roots that we're having. I mean, yesterday in some of the lectures, the importance was pointed out of getting back to the ethic values of Europe. I mean, there we have the ethic values of Europe in one symbol. I mean, Christianity has basically formed this continent. We can still today draw from that, and that I think would also be very good for our future.
Yeah, that's very true what you said. Thank you. I would now have a question if I move on for Philip, and then I would give the floor to another, not panelist, but Carlos has something to say. But before I give the floor to Carlos, I would like to ask you something, Philip. So we know that Brussels institutions are a bubble, an intercultural bubble, if I may call it so. So when I'm there, everything seems very simple, understandable. Of course, because we speak their language, so we speak the Brussels language. But when it comes to national level, to citizens, smaller regions, remote regions in certain member states, this language is not understandable at all. I mean, you worked at the European Parliament as a PR, which is even more important. Did you have a feeling that you actually worked as a translator of EU policies, and how to efficiently communicate the EU policy? Did you have to take this aspect into account when communicating with the public, with the audience? Because this is, of course, communication is a huge part of intercultural dialogue. Basically, this is the basis so that we understand each other.
Well, totally with you on that. And you're absolutely right. It is one of the many aspects you have when you work within the parliament as a public relations specialist. In my specific situation, of course, I was doing public relations for a certain member of European Parliament, Mr. Mandl. There was a very specific interest to especially communicate the work of this MEP. Also, of course, in terms of possible re-election. When I entered the parliament and the service as a PR guy there, I had many things going through my mind. Number one is your job. It's communicating basically the work of the MEP, as I stated before. Of course, you have some personal values as well. Communicating the European idea, the European project, the European policies, as you pointed out before, and many other things. So this all comes together, and then you start trying to do this kind of translation work. And that's where it gets tricky. As a spokesperson, I was communicating with special interest magazines, with the newspapers, daily newspapers, radio stations, weekly newspapers, TV stations, online blogs, and all that. And you have some high-level newspapers where you can really talk about policy issues. And you have these more regional newspapers who are more interested in just having a photo of the important MEP opening up the Zeltfest or anything like that. So there was a party, and of course he shook hands with some other VIP or stuff like that. So it's maybe one or two sentences. You don't really communicate any kind of policy in that field. Maybe in very specific situations, for example, when we met with people from the Red Cross or firefighters during the times of big catastrophes, when also the big catastrophes package was negotiated within the parliament, then you can make a hint to this specific area, but you cannot go in any kind of details in that respect. These kind of papers are just not interested in that, but those are the papers that are mostly read. So what you're trying to get to do there is more like, well, look, there's the member of European Parliament and he's still visiting local things, because many people think, oh God, this guy got elected to the European Parliament. So basically he moved to Brussels and we will never see him again. And so you try to make that idea go a little bit more away, so to say. That's one of the two things. The other thing is, of course, you always kind of suffer, you sit in all those committee meetings. I think Peter knows pretty well what I'm talking about. You negotiate policies, you go very much into detail, you meet 1,000 stakeholders, you fight all those attempts to get too many lobbyist ideas into your proposals, your amendments. We were working very strongly in the environmental committee as well, and one of my favorite lobbyists was of course Gerfried Gruber, because he was always lobbying for the Austrian interests, and as an Austrian MEP office, it was very easy to say, okay, we will go with the Austrian interests. Of course, that works politically. I'm trying not to get carried away and still stay on your question, Dejan, but what I want to say with that is, you go that much into the details of political work, of legislative work, and you cannot communicate most of it to any kind of broader public. You can communicate it within some stakeholders, of course. When you have to prepare your MEP for a meeting with industrial fellows from heavy industries or farming industry or whatever, you can brief him a little bit more detailed and tell him, okay, you should tell those people this or that, give them this or that insight, but they will never have the whole scope. And if you talk to a newspaper, they will cover 1,000 topics and they will ask any MEP, okay, what do you think about the vaccine right now? Mm-hmm. As if the MEP would have something to do with it. So you will never communicate all the details. And you mentioned a bubble situation. We always have that kind of bubble, but since I returned from Brussels to Vienna, I have to say, I just swapped the bubbles. It's another bubble now. And if I leave Vienna and go to some part in the countryside with people who don't have anything to do with any kind of politics, or at least they think, because everybody has to do with politics in daily life, of course, but some people don't see it as that. It's still like I mean, you know what I'm getting at, I guess. Yeah,
I'm sure.
You just go to another location, talk to different people, and very quickly you realize in what kind of different bubbles you used to run around in your daily life.
True.
I hope this got any kind near the question.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the intention here of this, let's say, session is, to talk. I mean, and if there are some comments or something that pops up or comes up to the mind of participants or panelists, I mean, we are free to ask. So at this point, I would give the floor to Carlos, since he said he had something to say. So Carlos, please, the floor is yours.
Can you listen to me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, good. Then I will close another second computer. First of all, I would like to congratulate the organizers and all the panelists. Yesterday it was also a very fruitful discussion, and I would like to make only just some comments. I would like to start with the comments of Professor Aserate, who gave very nice recommendations about Africa, and I mostly totally agree with him. I only just, he mentioned the important role of women in Africa, and this is true because women in Africa must be especially supported and encouraged, because in Africa, the women, they are the part of the society that they work more hard, and that they are more, they bring the family in their shoulders. And it's very important to encourage the women for this reason. Culturally, women in Africa are very important. As well, when he mentioned, if you don't give me the money, I will go to another country. In this regard, we should be a little bit also careful. I mean, of course, if we don't support the African countries, and it doesn't matter if they have dictators, if we don't support them, these dictators, they are going to ask the money, for example, to China or to other countries, no? And, but of course, the European values are not the Chinese values. Then in this regard, we must be carefully how, with this approach, but of course, we must be in Africa more strongly, as we are doing now. We must work with, for example, the origin immigration countries, but also with the transit countries of immigration. But when we have this approach to Africa, we think more in a security issues approach, because if they are developed, then we will be safe. This is the reality, but we don't have to keep only this security interest approach to Africa, because we have also a question of justice for this continent. there is a question of justice, because Africa was colonized in the past by Europeans, mostly, no? And in this regard, we have also a debt with Africa, of course. Former President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, spoke about the so-called Africa Plan. And we need to implement this plan. And these 6 months of the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union, they will be very important for that, because our Portuguese friends, they are preparing a summit among the European Union and the Africa Union for May, June, and they are trying to organize this. But also the Portuguese presidency has put in the center a very strong cooperation with Africa in terms of environmental affairs and agricultural issues. And well, I'm optimistic that the Portuguese, they will put pressure to do more things with Africa, because Portugal has also a lot of experience with African countries. And I am in this regard optimistic. And also, we must be careful with the influences not only of China over Africa, but also the influence of other countries, like, for example, Russia, and especially Turkey. Turkey is also very involved in Africa, supporting also some ideas, and we must try to avoid also radicalization in terms of Muslim faith in Africa. Well, these were only just some ideas that I have regarding the issue of Africa, and that I thought that it was interesting as a Spanish idea to. And regarding also the values, I just only want to mention that I'm totally agree also with Professor Aserate regarding that the values of Europe are the Acropolis, the Greek philosophy, also the Roman law, and also the Christian Jewish values, the Golgotha. And if we must sum up which the Christian values are, of course, Christian values nowadays are the advocacy of dignity. The human dignity nowadays is the best expression of the European Christian values mean. And well, this is what we can do as Christians in Europe, that we must advocate the human dignity everywhere in the whole world. And this is our commitment. They must be our commitment. And for example, it's also, as Carl von Hasselt mentioned, also a community. The European Union is also a community of law. This is true. And we have seen this, for example, I will give you the example of Brexit. With Brexit, to sum up, British, they wanted to keep the same privileges as before, but without but they didn't want to be under the European Union law, but they wanted to have the same rights as before and profit of the internal market. And then they wanted more or less to say to the European Union, okay, we have the same interests, the same privileges, but we needed to respect the European Union law. And if we have problems each other, we will try to find solutions as gentlemen. And we will find solutions in with good manners. Then the European Union, of course, has said, no, we are a community of law. This is not possible. You must,
Carlos, we couldn't really hear you for the last couple of seconds because it was interrupting you.
Now, yes?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yes, okay.
Yeah,
no, I only guessed that the British, they didn't want, for example, the arbitration card, because they didn't want to be submitted under the European Union law. Then I'm totally agree with Carl that also and this is also
Carlos, we can't really hear you.
Rule of law for us is also very important.
Okay, now he muted himself, but anyway, we couldn't hear. So maybe Carlos, if you reconnect once more, it would work. I
wanted to conclude.
No, yeah, I will mute him. And I suggest you, Carlos, if you still hear me, to reconnect maybe, because we can't hear and even see you basically anymore. So I will just then continue, since we are approaching the end of the panel and session as such. Maybe one last question from my side to Gerfried Gruber. Before Philipp was, let's say, joking a bit that, but it's part of the policy-making process. So lobbyists are part of the policy-making process, and working in the federal ministry, you in fact play two roles. As Philipp said, you were his favorite lobbyist in Brussels, but on the other hand, you said that you need to listen to many stakeholders when preparing legislation. What is easier in terms of policy-making process, being a lobbyist and pursue your objective, or listen to lobbyists and try to accommodate or not to accommodate them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for this interesting question, Mr. Hribar. I experienced both, as I mentioned previously, that I started my career being a lobbyist, so to say, in the Chamber of Agriculture, and then I changed to the public authority side. It's interesting to have both views. I would say you have more freedom, and it's in a way easier to be a lobbyist, to represent an interest group. On the other side, I feel better being on the side of the public authority, where you are able to then really negotiate with others on how things should be in the future, what strategies we want to have, which legislation, and to contribute to this, and to integrate the different views from stakeholders, from citizens, and then to have a final result on this. So not only to have this one point of view from the organization you represent as lobbyist, or from the point of a chamber representative, but to integrate everything. And this is the quite interesting but more complicated part, to put together all these ideas and have then as good as it gets with common sense, or a huge majority, to have a result. It starts at national level when we have our stakeholder processes here. Is for example, in the Austrian Forest Dialogue, and to have everybody integrated, and then to transmit it to the European level, the next step. Let me, to conclude, add something to the discussion on the dialogue, because this was very interesting for me to listen as well. First, Your Highness, we're keeping the torches lit up, and when it comes to having like-minded groups, it's mostly when it comes to forest policy, it's our neighbor countries, and we are in close cooperation at the Central European level, for example, but with others as well. The new wording is like-minded. This is the new talk in Europe. But I heard recently in a newspaper, I do not know whom I'm citing now, but there was a quote, Europe is like a bird who is flying, but with the eyes on the back, because it's more important for him to know where he comes from and where he goes to. So maybe Europe is best suited to have eyes on both sides. You have to know where you come from, and you have to know where you want to go together. And I think this is, beside the others, I want to underline the three hills and excellent. I want to add the Catholic social doctrine and others. This is the basis for Europe. We can come forward on this excellent basis, and it's a unique selling point for Europe. This is where we can really be proud of and be when we talk to others in the world on the same level, eye to eye. And I think we have to have this culture. Dialogue is everything, to listen to each other. This is culture, this is Europe, and to accept each other's positions and to come to common solutions, even if it's very complicated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I would take one last question, and if there is someone from audience, otherwise I would give the floor for the last question to Reinhard. So Reinhard, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. I'm coming back to this intercultural dialogue, but now I will try to shift it from the European level to a geopolitical level. I mean, we have been talking about the differences in Europe, the common roots of Europe. We have also been talking about Africa and China and the Chinese influence. And now I'm quoting from an article a friend of mine wrote. It's not published already. Philipp knows him, Faro Kayeti. And he's dealing very much with this, let me say, call it a threat from China and the Silk Road Initiative. And his hypothesis is that there is coming a new Silk Road Initiative from China, the challenging of what we developed in the Western world, the so-called human rights. So his hypothesis is that Chinese are coming with a new interpretation of human rights, which is their interpretation of human rights. And this is not the human rights as we see it. And China has already been successful on UN level, making coalitions, even with European countries, Visegrad countries, Italy supported it once, I think also Greek, etc. It gives a lot of examples, supporting the Chinese approach, but not the Western world approach. And so when I come back to what we said before, Europe is not united in many of these questions. Are we ready to face this challenge coming by China? A question is especially to our two speakers from the introductions.
Okay, thanks for the question. So who would like to answer first or comment first?
Could I say a few words?
Of course.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kluczek, and I do agree. This has always been a great problem when we talk about good governance and when we talk about human rights. And I'm also troubled by what you have said. And I should make it a point to say that we Africans have done something which is extraordinary. And I sincerely hope that this will be a detrimental to what is going to come from China. I'm talking about Agenda 2063. In the year 2013, we, to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the African Union, the Agenda 2063 was published. I love what it says underneath. The subtitle is Our Vision for Africa. And for the first time, Africans are expressing themselves as far as what are their values. And this might help us to come nearer, because up to now, whenever European governments came and talked about human rights, the African countries would always and say, well, we have a common ground, for example, the Charter of the United Nations. The Africans would say, hold on. With the exception of Ethiopia, Nobody of us was there in 1945 when you published the Charter of the United Nations. So it is irrelevant to us. You talk about the Human Rights Declaration of 1948. Again, the only signatory was Ethiopia from Africa, not us. And apart from everything else, the human rights are too Eurocentric. I'm glad to say, from this day on, which means 2013, African dictators and African presidents are no longer in a position to say that, because we have this new Agenda 2063, which says everything about human rights and all the values which I have until now seen in Europe and seen in European declarations are invested there. And I would sincerely hope that the European Union would make that the one cause of conditio sine qua non when giving development aid to Africans, saying, you have produced this new Agenda 2063. As long as you abide by it, we, the European Union, are ready to collaborate with you. If not, we're sorry, but our people don't allow us to work with African dictators. I think this would be a very new point, and I'm quite sure that the European Union is already working with the African Union on this level, but it should be closer, and I think then it would give us a broader base to fight against this new Chinese system of human rights. Thank you. Let me only make one comment to the wonderful thing Mr. Gruber just said. And he said that that the European Union was just like a bird. And I said, and looking forward and also looking backward. And I just wanted to mention, I suppose that is why the imperial government of Austria-Hungary had a double-headed eagle as its symbol, to look backwards and also to look forward. I think it makes a wonderful symbol also for the future of Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Maybe before I give the words to you, Mr. Habsburg, Peter, Stach, you have a question. You raised the hand so that Mr. Habsburg can conclude this session. Can you unmute?
Yes, maybe just one remark. Because we are talking about also or the overarching issue is multicultural dialogue, and we've been talking a lot about economy and cooperation, about trade, but I would like just to mention one thing that for me is also very crucial, and that was even in Europe, that was there from immediately after the Second World War, and almost like coming together with the first plans of German-French cooperation and coal and steel union, and it was, and I know the German-speaking people in this panel and in the audience, there are some will know the name Deutsch-Französisches Jugendwerk. German-French Jugendwerk, I don't know how to say it in English, but an organization created in order to enable young people from Germany and from France to know each other, to meet each other, to talk to each other. And with years, this context proved, I mean, these have been like hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of young people spending time in each other's country. learning their languages, making friendships. And this is something that MEPs and those who work in the European Parliament also know in a different frame. There is actually, the MEPs have the opportunity to invite people from their home countries to Strasbourg as well. And the idea behind that is basically the same as the idea behind the German-French Jugendwerk, youth work. The idea is that on one level, we can talk about multicultural dialogue, and we can have this dialogue on newspapers pages and so on. But on the other hand, this dialogue has to also be personal. People need to have the personal experience with this dialogue. And I just wanted to mention this because this is like a complementary thing to the big dialogue we are all talking about. And maybe also today, and especially with the relations to Africa, we've seen this development and this idea of scientific cooperation with Africa proposed by the European Commission. And this is another very good scientific educational cooperation, another very good example and very good idea of how to make the multicultural dialogue something tangible, something that people have their own experience with. So this was just my remark on that.
Okay, thank you. And now to conclude this session, I would give the final words to Mr. Habsburg, please.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, first of all, let me say how much I enjoy being part of discussion that goes from very concrete points like, education, lobbying, and agriculture in a swift way to redefinition of human rights. And I just think it's wonderful because we can see how flexible we are and how important it is to have that dialogue and actually, talk about the basics of our thoughts and our actions, but also get into the details. In this case, we were coming from the details and then we're going to the basics. I mean, Reinhard was asking the question, are we prepared to see what China is bringing to us and what it's doing to us? And the simple answer is, of course, no, we are absolutely not prepared. Why are we not prepared? We are not prepared because we are always lagging behind. Our administrations are always lagging behind the realities on the ground. I remember very well when I was a child or a young man, I know exactly we had a bipolar world between the Warsaw Pact on one side and the NATO on the other side. And when I started to go to join the military, we were all kind of going to the military with the idea that at some stage we would all be kind of part of potential war between Russia and the different countries around Russia and the Western pacts. So the Russian concept at the time was a hegemonial concept. So the hegemonial concept of actually land grabbing. I remember very well as a kid when we were kind of following the historic developments, we could see that for a certain period of time under Brezhnev, Russia was taking control of a country every 6 months on average, that they started to control, many of them, of course, also in Africa and on other continents. But that was the hegemonistic approach that Russia had. And most of the specialists that we were developing, be it on the intelligence side or on the administrative side, were, of course, specialists in that question, what was Russia, what was the hegemonistic approach there. Then with the breakdown of the Soviet Union, the world changed completely, first to a monopolar world, which was the United States and nobody else, and then to a multipolar world as we are seeing it developing now. And we can see that our specialists have changed from being specialists for, let's say, Russia or hegemonic approach to radicalism and Islamicist approach, a threat that was conceived by us as the main threat. And this way, we completely overlooked the fact that there are other potential threats coming to our values, not only to our economies, but also to our value systems. Like, for example, the Chinese approach where I think the main aspect of this Chinese approach is the fact that they're really living what the Afghans were telling to the American occupants at the time, that they said, you have the watches, we have the time. So China is very much living on the situation that they say, we have the time, we can wait things out. It was for me a very, very interesting meeting I had with a highly intelligent Chinese lady. She was at the time the president of the People's Congress of China. And this was in 2017, when Trump was just starting to come up making big statements in direction of China. And I had a dinner with her. We were talking about the approach that China would have towards Trump. And she was, I mean, absolutely cool and very friendly and extremely polite, and saying like, I mean, what are 3 years that we have to wait out? And even if it's 7 years, we wait out the 7 years. It doesn't really bother us very much, because it doesn't stop us in our development. And we will have to start and think about that, and think on how we are dealing with this approach. And I think one of the ways we have to think about it is really the question, again, what are our basic values? Where do we draw the line that we are not giving up on our basic values? If we are only dealing with a mercantilistic approach, then this is something we will not be able to face and confront on what is coming in our direction, which on one side, of course, is the Chinese approach. And on the other side, it's a complete disregard of any of our values from the side of Russia, as we haven't seen it in a long time. We have seen with the treatment of Alexei Navalny and his movement what the approach is that Russia is currently taking. Then this absolutely embarrassing visit of Josep Borrell that he just did to Russia, creeping along saying, oh no, we are not planning any new sanctions on Russia, was just, I mean, so embarrassing. I don't even know what to say as a European about that. So yes, we will have to rethink what our basic value is and really live along those. And for that also the debate like the one we had yesterday and today, I think is incredibly fruitful, because we are able to look back to our roots and implement it in what we are doing. So thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you. So we have come to an end. I would like to thank every speaker for taking time this Saturday morning. I know you could have done something else, but you came here, you took your time to be with us. So thank you very much, much appreciated. What follows next is, of course, what you said. We will draw kind of a summary and try to pull out some policy recommendations, which will be at the end of the project, presented in a bit nice way and sent to policymakers, decision makers, etc. And hopefully some of ideas that you draw today might fall on a fruitful soil, so that something comes out of it. As I said, thank you very much once again. I wish you a nice day, and I hope to see you all in 3 months, in the beginning of May, when we have the 5th webinar within this CITIMIG project. So enjoy, have a nice weekend, and I'm looking forward to seeing and meeting you again in 3 months.
Thanks, Dejan.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.